because Kunshan wasn't originally chosen to be this favorable economic area, so it had to develop itself.
So Kunshan was not favored.
It was not.
Why not? Why not? With this Gu Yanwu's great history, hairy crabs, why not?
Well, at the time it was solely agricultural, so it was too small and didn't have the advantages the government thought. So.
Okay, so it wasn't chosen. Suzhou gets to have an export processing zone. Shanghai, Shenzhen earlier. Jasmine? So poor Kunshan left into the cold.
Yeah, its county government invested in its own infrastructure and created its own development, which attracted the central government eventually, but it was kind of a case where the local government took the initiative.
So the local government took the initiative without question. How did they take the initiative? Roseanne?
I think that part of it was that they were very open to business partners, including like international opportunities. And so I guess sort of to segue around what Professor Bull was saying, I actually think that one of the big reasons that they may have reached out to Duke was that both of them do have a very big history of internationalization.
They certainly both do. Jasmine? Mona?
So the local government systems were very conducive to entrepreneurship and FDI.
Okay.
For example, they had official liaisons to help foreign investors. They had websites in English and Chinese, which made investment information accessible. And there was this emphasis on zero barrier, low cost, high efficiency. So in a country where there's a lot of bureaucracy and people typically have to go to many government officials, the fact that they could go to just one government official in Kunshan was a huge advantage.
So they can make it easier. So, but you use this phrase, local government, at least I think you did, entrepreneurship. Are governments entrepreneurs? We've been talking about governments being a problem sometimes for businesses, particularly for private businesses. Obviously, Adrian?
I don't know if I'd call them an entrepreneur in this case, but they're definitely investors, so they create this infrastructure that become attractive to foreign investors. And as Jasmine was just saying, the fact that they created this infrastructure allowed, eventually in 1983, the first Japanese company to jump in.
Right, so they're an early mover in bringing in foreign enterprise. 1983 is actually very early. Emma?
Their relationship with Taiwan was also hugely
So how did they do this? Does China have relations with Taiwan? What are China's political relations with Taiwan today? Currently, or even back then?
Japan. Yeah. Pretty awkward.
There are no political relations, formal political relations, that is to say, between the People's Republic on the mainland and the Republic of China on Taiwan. And yet there are extraordinary, and think about it, from 1949 really until the mid-1980s, there are no relations at all. There's no investment. There are no telephone calls. There's no mail. Taipei seems closer in the mid-1980s to Los Angeles than it does to Shanghai. And this is one of the reasons why this begins to change. So how do they do this? So they're not a special economic zone to begin with. We have all of these things of what they are, an SEZ, an ETDZ, an EPZ, and so on. They aren't these things, and so what do? How do they, Joshua, do you remember? How do they get going?
Don't local businessmen reach out to Taiwanese businessmen to ask, to invite them in to trade and to invite them in to buy?
They do it without any formal relationship. And they make it easy for people to come and invest there. That's part of it. But it isn't just Taiwan. If you're getting people like Taiwanese business people to come to Kunshan, so getting foreign investment, first with bicycles and so on, how do you do it?
In 1985, the local government unilaterally set up an ETDZ without higher approval.
That's right. They set up this economic technological development zone at a time, so 1985, very close to the time when the first special economic zones set up, Shenzhen and others. So what's the lesson you take away from his declaring an economic and technological development zone without having the permission to do so?
It's kind of like, I think this was in the book that we have to read for Wednesday, but that's saying it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission.
That's right. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Otherwise, you miss a huge opportunity possibly for this town. This is one of the fundamental lessons of business in China that you must always remember. shoot first and ask permission second, or ask forgiveness and not permission, if need be, if it doesn't turn out so well. But they move into an area where no one else is. How can he do it? He can do it in part because does he answer? He's within Suzhou, but does he answer to Suzhou? Not really. This place is really unimportant in the early 1980s. Nobody cares about Kunshan. Suzhou cares about Suzhou and building up Suzhou fast. It had been a great metropolis and an industrial center in the Republican period and a great center of learning and industry in earlier periods. Shanghai, of course, the greatest metropolis. And Kunshan is a total backwater. No, I mean, it's got the crabs, fine. But it's just about it. It's a total backwater. And so they declare an economic and technological development zone. My guess is that nobody knows. So what does this zone allow them to do? Between Shanghai and Suzhou, what is their advantage comparatively? Sarah?
I think the fact that they're smaller actually is an advantage in that these larger cities are not going to favor the smaller investors, but they're not picky about it, so they'll take
anybody to start with. To be
and
sure.
they can also have more personal relationships with the investors because they are smaller.
So they're right on the border of the Minhang district, for example, of Shanghai or other districts of Shanghai. If you want to invest in the Minhang district in Shanghai, something very large, you will need to get the agreement of that district, which is bigger than the size of all of Kunshan in population. Then you might need several more at the city and municipal and other levels. Julius, location, indeed. They get the people who don't find what they want in Shanghai or Suzhou, and they get the overflow from this initially. But they do it also by having this, allegedly, but it really seems to be true, one-stop shop. It can take you 60 or 70 official stamps to get something approved, which means 60 or 70 officials who need to be banqueted frequently or otherwise taken care of. Here, you just a couple of hairy crab banquets. No, I'm kidding. They don't. It's really very straightforward as to how. Michael, you want to?
The advantage that Kunshan had, especially compared to other neighboring cities, is their migrant policy.
Yes.
Yes. Because they had a very dynamic labor force that even received United Nations recognition in how great it was and how it's treated migrant workers. So it not only let in a lot of migrant workers that could be beneficial to the labor force, but also treated them relatively well in terms of giving them educational and health care benefits, etc.
That's right. So why do they need migrant workers, Michael?
To have sort of low-cost labor, but at the same time have high-cost labor and managers from other neighboring cities. So they sort of had it all.
Right, but they need the labor. If they're going to be a center of foreign investment, they don't have the labor, a sufficient labor pool right there. And so they welcome. It isn't like they're inundated with migrants kind of camping out in shanties. They welcome them and integrate them into their developmental strategy, which is a small, effectively autonomous city. Even though formally under Suzhou, they can do pretty much what they want, in part because they're originally really unimportant. They can do what they want. And suddenly now they are very, very important, and they're the model of small town success.
Another thing adding on that was their policy of cheap land and cheap labor. So you had companies wanting to import their business there and begin factories and production in a place where labor and land were cheaper.
Excellent. Okay, very good. Jasmine?
They also had preferential policies like tax exemptions, land use free concessions, and incentives to make the companies, to induce companies to invest.